The soft light of dawn filters through the aged curtains of Eleanor Blackwood's recently inherited Victorian home. The motes of dust dance in the air, illuminated by the gentle rays that manage to penetrate the fabric. Eleanor, a 32-year-old archivist with a specialization in historical photography, stands in what was once her great-grandmother's bedroom, surrounded by boxes of family heirlooms she had never seen before. "What secrets did you keep, great-grandmother Evelyn?" Eleanor whispers, her fingers tracing the ornate wooden chest she had just unlocked with a small brass key found in her late mother's jewelry box. The chest creaks open, revealing stacks of aged photographs, letters tied with faded ribbon, and various memorabilia from a bygone era. Eleanor carefully lifts out the contents, handling each item with the reverence of someone who understands the fragility of history. At the bottom of the chest lies a large oval-framed portrait, facing downward. She turns it over and gasps softly. The portrait is of a nursery scene from 1913, as indicated by the date etched into the lower right corner of the frame. It depicts a beautiful Victorian nursery, meticulously arranged with a wooden cradle, rocking horse, and shelves of toys that would have been fashionable for wealthy families of the time. In the center, seated in an ornate chair, is a woman in an elegant Edwardian gown, her hair styled in the characteristic pompadour of the era. On her lap sits a baby, perhaps 6 months old, dressed in an elaborate christening gown of white lace. "This must be great-grandmother Evelyn," Eleanor murmurs, studying the woman's face. Despite the formal pose typical of photography from that period, there's something unsettling about the woman's expression, a tightness around her eyes, a tension in her smile that suggests discomfort or fear rather than maternal pride. Eleanor's eyes drift to the baby. Unlike most infants in formal portraits of the era, who typically appeared solemn or confused by the lengthy exposure process, this child stares directly at the camera with an unnerving clarity. Around the baby's neck hangs a small, intricately designed locket. "I never knew great-grandmother had a child before my grandfather," Eleanor says to herself, puzzled. According to family history, Evelyn had married in 1920 and given birth to Eleanor's grandfather, Richard, in 1922. This photograph, dated 1913, contradicted everything she knew about her family timeline. Eleanor retrieves her magnifying glass from her archival kit and leans in to examine the details of the portrait more closely. The nursery is lavish, filled with toys and furnishings that would have been the height of luxury in 1913. The walls are adorned with framed illustrations from children's books popular during that era, scenes from Peter Rabbit and Alice in Wonderland. A teddy bear, still relatively novel in 1913 following President Theodore Roosevelt's popularization of the toy, sits on a shelf beside a collection of porcelain dolls with vacant eyes. But it's the locket around the baby's neck that draws Eleanor's attention most keenly. Even through the magnifying glass, the details are difficult to discern. She reaches for her digital camera with its macro lens capability and takes several close-up photographs of the portrait, focusing specifically on the locket. Later that evening, Eleanor sits at her computer, uploading the digital images. The house creaks and settles around her, the sounds amplified in the emptiness of the night. She enhances the images of the locket, zooming in to reveal its details. "What is that?" she whispers, leaning closer to the screen. The locket is oval-shaped, made of what appears to be gold or brass, but it's what's engraved on its surface that causes Eleanor's breath to catch. Revealed in the enhanced image is a symbol, an inverted pentagram surrounded by an intricate pattern of interconnected circles and lines, forming what appears to be a kind of binding sigil. Eleanor's academic background immediately signals recognition. This is no ordinary decorative pattern. In various occult traditions of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, such symbols were associated with protection against, or sometimes invocation of, supernatural entities. During the Edwardian era, interest in spiritualism and the occult had reached a fever pitch among certain circles of society, with seances and spirit photography becoming fashionable pastimes for the wealthy and educated. "Why would a baby be wearing this?" Eleanor murmurs, a chill running down her spine despite the warmth of the room. She turns back to the chest, searching for any additional information about the photograph or the child. Among the stacks of letters, she discovers a thin journal bound in faded red leather, its pages yellowed with age. The inscription on the first page reads, "The Private Journal of Evelyn Rose Blackwood, 1913." Eleanor's heart races as she carefully turns the fragile pages, scanning her great-grandmother's elegant handwriting for any mention of the child in the photograph. She finds her answer on a page dated April 17, 1913. The child came to us today. Margaret delivered her just after midnight. Such a tiny thing, with eyes that seem to hold the wisdom of ages. Henry insists we call her Lillian, after his mother. I am to present her as my own, though the deception weighs heavily upon my conscience. But what choice do we have? Margaret's condition would bring shame upon the entire family, and the circumstances of conception are too terrible to acknowledge in polite society. The arrangement has been made. Margaret will convalesce at the sanitarium in Switzerland, and Lillian will be raised as a Blackwood. God forgive us for this necessary falsehood. Eleanor sits back, processing this revelation. The child in the portrait was not her great-grandmother's biological daughter, but apparently the child of someone named Margaret, a relative perhaps, who had become pregnant under scandalous circumstances. Such arrangements were not uncommon in that era, when unwed motherhood carried severe social stigma. But this doesn't explain the strange locket or the unsettling quality of the portrait. Eleanor continues reading, flipping through the journal entries of the subsequent weeks. Evelyn's initial entries about caring for the infant Lillian are filled with ordinary details about feeding schedules and sleepless nights. But by May, the tone changes dramatically. May 10, 1913. Lillian will not stop crying when the sun sets. Nothing soothes her, not rocking, singing, nor walking the floors. Mrs. Winters, the nurse, has threatened to leave our employ if the disturbances continue. I fear there is something unnatural about the child's distress. Last night, as she finally fell silent at precisely 3 o'clock, every timepiece in the nursery stopped simultaneously. Henry says it is merely coincidence, but I am not convinced. May 15, 1913. The incidents continue. The nursery grows cold without explanation, even as the rest of the house remains warm in this mild spring weather. Lillian's toys rearrange themselves when no one is looking. The rocking horse moves as though an invisible child rides it. Mrs. Winters found her crucifix bent and twisted this morning and has given her notice. I cannot blame her, though her departure leaves me alone with the child. Henry spends more and more time at his club, unwilling to acknowledge what is happening under our roof. May 21, 1913. Margaret's letter arrived today from Switzerland. She writes of terrible dreams, that she sees Lillian in her sleep, though the child is an ocean away. She claims the baby speaks to her in these dreams, though of course at 4 months Lillian can produce no more than coos and gurgles in waking life. Margaret begs to know if the child wears the locket she left for her. I have not told her that I cannot remove it. The clasp refuses to open, and when I tried to cut the chain, the scissors shattered in my hand, leaving a wound that required 7 stitches. Eleanor's hands tremble slightly as she turns the page. The journal entries become increasingly disturbing as Evelyn describes phenomena that modern readers would identify as classic poltergeist activity: objects moving, unexplained noises, sudden temperature drops. But it's the entry from June 3rd that causes Eleanor to gasp audibly. June 3, 1913. I consulted Dr. Blackwell today, a man recommended by Henry's colleague at the university. Dr. Blackwell is not a conventional physician, but rather a specialist in matters of the esoteric and supernatural. Upon examining Lillian and hearing my account of the strange occurrences, he asked to see the locket. His reaction confirmed my worst fears. The symbol engraved upon it is ancient, he says, a binding sigil used to contain malevolent entities. He believes Margaret may have sought the help of someone versed in the dark arts during her pregnancy, perhaps to protect her child from the man who violated her. But such protection comes at a terrible cost. The entity bound to protect Lillian is not benevolent. It is something old and hungry that demands payment for its services. Dr. Blackwell warned that such bindings weaken over time, and when they fail entirely, I cannot bring myself to record what he predicted. Eleanor checks the time. Nearly midnight. The old house seems to have grown quieter, the ambient sounds of settling wood and distant traffic fading into an unnatural silence. She should stop reading, get some rest, approach this with fresh eyes in the morning. But she can't tear herself away from Evelyn's journal, from the mystery of the child with the forbidden symbol around her neck. The entries continue through June and July, documenting escalating phenomena. Strange bruises appearing on Evelyn's body, whispers emanating from empty rooms, the persistent odor of decay that no amount of cleaning could eliminate. Servants refused to stay, leaving Evelyn increasingly isolated with Lillian. Henry's appearances in the journal become rare. According to Evelyn, he had taken to staying at his club for days at a time, unwilling to face what was happening in his home. July 30th, 1913. Dr. Blackwell returned today with an associate, a woman he introduced as Madame Sibylla. She claims lineage from a long line of practitioners of protective magic. Upon entering the nursery, she immediately fell to her knees, overcome by what she described as a miasma of malevolence. She confirmed Dr. Blackwell's assessment of the locket, but offered a glimmer of hope. The binding can be reinforced, she says, through a ritual that must be performed during the dark of the moon. I have agreed to her terms, though the preparations she requires are disturbing. I would sacrifice anything to protect this innocent child, even if she is not of my blood. The next several entries detail Evelyn's preparations for the ritual, gathering obscure herbs and minerals, constructing a protective circle in the nursery using salt and iron filings, sewing a special garment for Lillian from fabric that had been soaked in a solution of holy water and various botanical extracts. Eleanor recognizes some elements from her research into folk magic and protective rituals practiced in rural America and Europe during the early 20th century, but others are unfamiliar, suggesting traditions perhaps older or more obscure. August 7th, 1913. The ritual is complete. Madame Sibylla arrived at midnight, bringing with her a leather case containing implements I dare not describe. Dr. Blackwell assisted, though I noted his reluctance to handle certain aspects of the procedure. The child remained eerily calm throughout, her eyes fixed on Madame Sibylla as though they shared some secret communication. When it was done, when the final words were spoken and the locket sealed with wax mixed with a substance I was told not to inquire about, a change came over the nursery. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, like the breaking of a fever. Lillian smiled, the first genuine smile I have witnessed since her arrival. I dare to hope we have succeeded. August 10th, 1913. 3 days of blessed normalcy. Lillian sleeps through the night now, waking only for her feeding. The nursery remains at a pleasant temperature. No unexplained noises disturb our rest. Henry has returned home, though he avoids the nursery and rarely speaks of Lillian. Perhaps in time he will forget the unpleasantness of the past months. I have commissioned a portrait to commemorate our restored peace. A family portrait of sorts, though only Lillian and I will pose. Henry refuses to participate and I will not force the issue. The photographer comes tomorrow. Eleanor glances at the portrait that started her investigation. This must be the very photograph Evelyn had commissioned, a commemoration not of a joyful family milestone but of a narrowly averted supernatural disaster. Yet, looking at it now with this new context, Eleanor can see tension in every line of her great-grandmother's body, in the tight set of her smile. This was not a woman at peace, but one vigilantly guarding against a threat she believed merely contained, not eliminated. The next entry chills Eleanor to the bone. August 15th, 1913. The photographer, Mr. Sullivan, is dead. They found him in his dark room, surrounded by shattered glass plates of our portrait. According to the policeman who came to inform us, Mr. Sullivan's assistant discovered him this morning, his eyes fixed in an expression of absolute terror, his mouth open in a silent scream. The official determination is apoplexy, but I know better. He saw something in that portrait as it developed in the chemical bath, something that stopped his heart. Yet our copy arrived by messenger this afternoon, perfectly innocent in appearance. I have examined it closely and can detect nothing amiss, save for the unnaturally clear focus of Lillian's eyes. I considered destroying it, but fear the consequences of such an action. Instead, I have placed it in the chest with this journal, where it will remain, God willing, undisturbed. Eleanor's eyes dart to the portrait leaning against her desk. The photographer who created it had died immediately afterward, apparently terrified by something he saw in the development process. She should be frightened, should perhaps even follow her instinct to put the portrait back in the chest and lock it away. But her academic curiosity overrides her apprehension. There are too many unanswered questions. The journal entries continue, documenting a period of relative calm that lasted through September. Evelyn writes of Lillian's development, her first tooth, her attempts to crawl, her babbling that occasionally formed what sounded like words, though Evelyn notes with unease that these seeming words were in no language she recognized. There are references to letters from Margaret in Switzerland, whose health was reportedly improving, though she continued to have disturbing dreams about her child. Then in early October, the tone shifts again. October 3rd, 1913. It begins again. The locket's binding weakens. I noticed it first 3 nights ago, a faint glow emanating from beneath Lillian's nightgown as she slept. Last night I heard her giggling in conversation with someone, though when I entered the nursery she was alone in her crib. The rocking horse moved today of its own accord, slowly at first, then with increasing violence until it toppled over. I have telegraphed Dr. Blackwell, but his response indicates he is abroad and cannot return for at least a fortnight. I have also written to Madame Sibylla, but have received no reply. I fear we are alone in this struggle. October 10th, 1913. Henry has taken to drink. I cannot blame him. The sounds from the nursery would drive anyone to seek oblivion. Last night, it was the sound of thousands of insects crawling within the walls. The night before, a chorus of children's voices singing a nursery rhyme in discordant harmony. Lillian thrives amidst this chaos, her cheeks rosy, her appetite voracious. She watches me with those knowing eyes as I pace the nursery, searching for the sources of these torments. The locket pulses now with a visible rhythm, like a tiny heartbeat beneath her gown. October 15th, 1913. A telegram arrived from the sanitarium in Switzerland. Margaret is dead. They found her hanging from a beam in her room, her bed sheets fashioned into a crude rope. The director writes that she left no note, but her final visitors reported her speaking obsessively about needing to free the child from its bargain. I have not told Henry. He is barely functional as it is. The nursemaid I hired last week fled this morning after finding Lillian's cradle hovering 3 feet above the floor. I am alone now with whatever inhabits this house alongside us. Eleanor pauses in her reading, a sense of dread building. The journal's narrative is approaching a climax, and she's not certain she wants to know how this story ends. But her academic training pushes her forward. Whatever happened to baby Lillian and great-grandmother Evelyn is historical fact now, long resolved. Understanding it can't hurt her, can it? She turns the page to find Evelyn's handwriting has changed, the previously elegant script now jagged and hurried, as though written by a trembling hand. October 21st, 1913. I cannot sleep. The entity no longer bothers with subtle manifestations. It appeared to me last night as I sat beside Lillian's cradle, a shape formed of shadow and mist, with eyes like distant stars. It spoke in Margaret's voice, telling me that the binding spell was a mistake, that it has trapped something that should have remained free. It claims that Lillian is not what she appears to be, that she is merely a vessel, a chrysalis for something waiting to emerge. I refuse to believe this obscenity. Whatever Margaret did, whatever bargain she struck, Lillian is an innocent child. I will protect her, even from her own mother's misguided actions. October 24th, 1913. Henry is gone. We quarreled terribly last night after he suggested we should abandon the house and Lillian with it. Leave it for the servants to discover, he said, as though she were a piece of unwanted furniture rather than a living child. When I refused, he packed a valise and stormed out. Perhaps it is better this way. His fear was becoming dangerous. The entity grows stronger each night. The locket now burns to the touch, the symbol upon it sometimes shifting and changing when viewed from the corner of one's eye. Lillian speaks now, full sentences in that unknown language, her infant mouth forming sounds no child should be capable of producing. I have moved her cradle into my bedroom. I dare not leave her alone, even for a moment. October 31st, 1913. All Hallows Eve. The barrier thins tonight between our world and whatever lies beyond. I can feel it in the air, a pressure building like the atmosphere before a violent storm. Madame Sibylla finally responded to my increasingly desperate letters. Her reply was brief and terrifying. Destroy the locket before midnight, whatever the cost. But how? I have tried everything. Hammers shatter, blades snap, fire will not touch it. Even the strongest acid merely bubbles and evaporates when it contacts the metal surface. As I write these words, Lillian sits in her cradle, watching me with eyes that now sometimes flash golden in the lamplight. The locket pulses against her chest, the rhythm increasing as the clock ticks toward midnight. If you are reading this, know that I tried. God help us all, I tried. This is the final entry in the journal. Eleanor stares at the empty pages that follow, her mind racing. What happened after midnight on Halloween, 1913? The journal offers no resolution, no explanation for how the crisis apparently resolved itself, for it must have resolved somehow. Her grandfather Richard had been born to Evelyn in 1922, suggesting she survived whatever occurred that night. And what of Lillian? There was no record of her in the family histories Eleanor had studied, no photographs of her beyond infancy, no mention of her in her grandfather's stories about his mother. Eleanor turns back to her computer, studying the enhanced image of the locket with its forbidden symbol. In the digital enlargement, she notices something she hadn't seen before: tiny inscriptions around the edge of the pentagram, characters in what appears to be some form of ancient script. She doesn't recognize the language, but the letter forms remind her of something she had seen in one of her university courses on ancient Mediterranean civilizations. She opens her browser and begins researching, cross-referencing the symbol and script with various occult traditions of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Hours pass as she falls down an academic rabbit hole, moving from reputable scholarly sources to increasingly obscure websites dedicated to esoteric knowledge. At 3 in the morning, she finds herself on a specialized forum for collectors of occult artifacts. A post from 5 years earlier catches her attention. Someone seeking information about a specific binding sigil used in the early 1900s by a secretive group called the Order of the Eternal Twilight. The description matches the symbol on Lillian's locket perfectly. Eleanor creates an account and sends a private message to the poster, not expecting a response given the age of the thread. To her surprise, a reply arrives within minutes. "Where did you see this symbol? This is urgently important." The sender's username is Blackwell Legacy. Eleanor's pulse quickens. Could this be a descendant of the Dr. Blackwell mentioned in Evelyn's journal? She responds, explaining about the portrait and her great-grandmother's journal, careful not to reveal her exact location or full name. The reply comes swiftly. The binding was temporary by design. It requires renewal every 100 years. October 31st, 2013 would have been the deadline for the next binding ritual. If it wasn't performed, the entity is no longer contained. "Do you have the locket?" Eleanor types back. "No, just the portrait showing it. I don't know what happened to the actual locket." There's a longer pause before the next message appears. "The portrait itself is dangerous. The entity can use it as a conduit if the original binding has failed. You need to check something immediately. Look at the portrait again, specifically at the toys on the shelf behind Evelyn and Lillian. Count them and tell me how many you see." Eleanor glances nervously at the portrait leaning against her desk. Despite the lateness of the hour and the disturbing implications of this online conversation, she feels compelled to comply. She picks up the portrait and studies the shelf of toys visible in the background of the nursery scene. "I see 7 toys," she types. "A teddy bear, 3 porcelain dolls, a wooden train, a small drum, and what looks like a cloth rabbit." The response is immediate and chilling. There should be 6. The cloth rabbit wasn't in the original portrait. It's manifesting elements into the image. The process has begun. You need to destroy the portrait immediately. Burn it completely to ashes. Do not look at it again after reading this message. Do it now. Eleanor stares at the screen, her academic skepticism warring with the undeniable evidence of Evelyn's journal and the urgency in Blackwell Legacy's messages. She looks back at the portrait, specifically at the shelf of toys. The cloth rabbit is no longer there. In its place is a small figurine that looks disturbingly like a miniature version of Eleanor herself, complete with the sweater she is currently wearing. Her blood runs cold. This can't be happening. It's late. She's tired. Her mind is playing tricks after hours of reading disturbing material. She blinks hard and looks again. The figurine is now positioned differently, its tiny arms outstretched toward the viewer. With a cry of alarm, Eleanor drops the portrait. As it hits the floor, the glass front shatters. But instead of the expected sound of breaking glass, she hears what sounds like a child's laughter, distant but distinct. Her hands shaking, she retrieves her phone and takes a picture of the portrait where it lies amidst the shattered glass. She needs evidence, needs to confirm what she's seeing is real and not a hallucination born of exhaustion and suggestion. The photo shows nothing unusual, just a damaged antique portrait with broken glass. But as Eleanor stares at it, the image on her phone screen begins to change. The baby in the portrait, Lillian, turns her head to look directly at the camera, an impossible movement in a static photograph. The locket around her neck glows with an unnatural light, the forbidden symbol clearly visible now even without magnification. Eleanor drops the phone as if it's burned her. On the floor, the actual portrait begins to change as well. The image of baby Lillian seems to be pushing against the surface of the photograph, the paper bulging outward as if something is trying to emerge from within the two-dimensional space. Remembering Blackwell Legacy's urgent instruction, Eleanor runs to the kitchen and returns with a box of matches and a metal trash can. Her hands tremble so violently she can barely strike the match. But on the third attempt, she succeeds. She touches the flame to the corner of the portrait. Nothing happens. The flame gutters and dies without igniting the paper. She tries again with the same result. The portrait seems resistant to burning, just as Evelyn had described the locket's resistance to destruction. In desperation, Eleanor runs back to her computer to ask Blackwell Legacy for alternative methods. A new message awaits her. If burning fails, submersion in running water with salt and iron might slow the manifestation. You need to get the portrait to me. I have resources my ancestors' journal documented. Where are you located? Eleanor hesitates. Giving her location to a stranger on the internet goes against every instinct. But what choice does she have? The portrait on her floor is now visibly moving, the image of Lillian seemingly breathing, the locket pulsing with a rhythmic glow that illuminates the darkened room. She types her city and state, adding, "But how do I safely transport it? It's changing as I watch." "Containment box," comes the swift reply. "Construct a box lined with salt, iron filings if you have them, silver if possible. Place the portrait inside and seal it with wax mixed with more salt. Do not open it under any circumstances. I can be there by tomorrow evening. Until then, keep the box in running water. A bathtub with the tap open is ideal." Eleanor glances back at the portrait. The bulging has increased. The image of Lillian now three-dimensional, tiny fingers pushing through the surface of the photograph like a membrane. The locket glows brighter, the forbidden symbol seeming to float above the surface. With a surge of adrenaline, Eleanor gathers the materials as instructed: a wooden box from her craft supplies, table salt from the kitchen, iron filings scraped from an old tool in the garage, candles for the wax. She works quickly, methodically, her academic mind focusing on the precise execution of these instructions rather than the impossibility of what is happening. As she completes the makeshift containment vessel, a noise from behind her makes her spin around. The portrait on the floor has changed dramatically. The image of Evelyn has faded almost completely, while Lillian has become even more prominent, her features sharper, older somehow. No longer a baby, but a toddler with a knowing expression that sends chills down Eleanor's spine. The locket floats an inch above the surface of the portrait, no longer a two-dimensional representation, but a physical object emanating a pulsing golden light. The forbidden symbol writhes and shifts, the ancient characters rearranging themselves into new configurations. With a shaking hand, Eleanor reaches for the portrait, intending to slide it into the prepared box. As her fingers touch the edge of the frame, a jolt of energy surges through her body, knocking her backward. She hits the wall hard, momentarily dazed. When her vision clears, she sees that the portrait has changed again. Lillian now appears to be a child of about 5 years old, though still wearing the christening gown that stretches unnaturally across her larger form. Her eyes are fixed on Eleanor, her mouth curved in an unchildlike smile. The locket hovers above her chest, spinning slowly, the forbidden symbol now glowing red like heated metal. Eleanor forces herself to her feet, ignoring the pain in her back where she hit the wall. She can't touch the portrait directly. That much is clear. Looking around frantically, she spots a pair of tongs in her archival toolkit. She grabs them and approaches the portrait again, cautiously extending the tongs toward the frame. No energy surge this time. She manages to grip the edge of the frame and quickly slides the portrait into the salt-lined box. As she does, a high-pitched keening fills the room. Not quite a scream, not quite a wind, but something in between that sets her teeth on edge and makes the hair on her arms stand up. Working quickly, she seals the box with wax as instructed, mixing in salt as she drips it along the seam where the lid meets the base. The keening intensifies and the box begins to vibrate on the table, moving in small, erratic jerks. Eleanor carries the box to the bathroom, placing it in the tub and turning on the tap to create a steady stream of running water. As the water touches the box, steam rises, not the expected result of cold water hitting a room temperature object. The vibrations slow, then stop. The keening fades to a low hum, then silence. Exhausted but afraid to leave the box unattended, Eleanor sits on the closed toilet lid, watching the water flow over the sealed container. Her phone pings with a new message from Blackwell Legacy. "Containment successful?" "Yes," she types back. "Box is sealed and submerged in running water. What happens now?" "I'll arrive tomorrow with proper containment tools. The entity is temporarily subdued, but not defeated. It's been gathering strength for a decade since the binding expired. The portrait is just a conduit. We need to locate the original locket to perform a permanent binding. Was there anything else in the chest with the portrait and journal? Eleanor thinks back to her initial exploration of the chest's contents. There had been photographs, letters, various mementos, and a small velvet pouch she had set aside for later examination. There was a velvet pouch I haven't opened yet, she replies. Could that contain the locket? Don't open it, comes the immediate response. The physical locket would be even more dangerous than its image. Keep it in the chest until I arrive. Tell me about the house. How old is it? Has it been in your family continuously since 1913? Eleanor provides the requested information. The house was built in 1890, purchased by her great-great-grandfather Henry Blackwood in 1910. It had remained in family ownership ever since, though it had stood vacant for periods when various family members moved away for work or marriage. Eleanor had inherited it following her mother's death 6 months earlier. The entity has been dormant within the house all this time, Blackwell Legacy responds. The portrait's discovery has awakened it. The 100-year binding expired in 2013, but without access to the locket or a suitable conduit, it remained trapped. Your interaction with the portrait provided the opportunity it needed. Stay vigilant tonight. Keep the box submerged. If you hear children's voices or smell something like rotting flowers, reinforce the salt barrier around the tub immediately. Eleanor glances nervously around the bathroom. The only sound is the gentle splashing of water over the containment box. No voices, no unusual smells. Yet. Who are you? She types. How do you know about all this? There's a long pause before the response arrives. My name is James Blackwell, Dr. Samuel Blackwell, who assisted your great-grandmother, was my great-grandfather. Our family's histories are intertwined through this entity. The Order of the Eternal Twilight didn't just bind entities, they studied them, documented them, sometimes exploited them. Some members, like my great-grandfather, eventually recognized the danger and dedicated themselves to containing what their predecessors had unleashed. I've spent my life continuing that work. Eleanor processes this information, her historian's mind fitting the pieces together. What was Margaret's relationship to Evelyn? Why did she have the baby bound to this entity? Margaret was Evelyn's younger sister, James replies. She was violated by a high-ranking member of the order who had been experimenting with entity communion. The pregnancy that resulted was not entirely human. The binding wasn't to protect the child from the entity, but to protect the world from what the child might become if the entity fully merged with her. The locket contains both a binding spell and a portion of the entity itself, a paradoxical arrangement that creates a closed loop, preventing complete manifestation. What happened on Halloween night 1913? Eleanor asks, the key question that Evelyn's journal had left unanswered. James's response is slow in coming. According to my great-grandfather's records, Evelyn performed a desperate ritual of her own devising. Unable to destroy the locket, she found a way to absorb a portion of the binding into herself, sharing the burden with the talisman. It weakened the entity enough to force it into dormancy, but left Evelyn connected to it for the remainder of her life. The price was high. She aged rapidly. Her vitality drained to maintain the binding. She lived long enough to have your grandfather in 1922, but died shortly after his 5th birthday, looking decades older than her actual age. And Lillian? What happened to her? The journal doesn't tell you. No, Eleanor replies. The entries end on Halloween night. There's a lengthy pause before James's next message. Lillian disappeared that same night. The entity was forced into dormancy, but it took Lillian with it. Neither was destroyed, merely suspended. My great-grandfather believed that Lillian and the entity had become too intertwined to separate. The binding spell contained them both within the locket. That's why it's so dangerous. It doesn't just house an entity. It houses a hybrid being that exists in a state between human and other. Eleanor shudders, remembering the way the image of Lillian in the portrait had aged before her eyes, the knowing expression on the child's face. What do we do with it once you arrive? Can it be destroyed? Not destroyed, James replies. But it can be rebound, more permanently this time, with modern techniques my family has developed. The new binding won't expire after 100 years, but it requires specific materials and preparation. I'll bring everything needed. For now, focus on maintaining the temporary containment. Try to rest if you can, but stay alert. Rest seems impossible given the circumstances, but Eleanor acknowledges the wisdom of the advice. She positions herself on the bathroom floor, back against the wall, where she can observe the containment box while still keeping a safe distance. The water continues to flow over it, creating a hypnotic sound that, despite her tension, begins to lull her toward sleep. She fights to stay awake, periodically checking her phone for any additional messages from James. None come. The bathroom remains quiet, except for the running water. The house around her still and silent. At some point, despite her best efforts, exhaustion claims her. She drifts into an uneasy sleep, her dreams filled with images of the portrait. Lillian growing older before her eyes, the locket pulsing with malevolent light, the forbidden symbol shifting and changing into configurations that hurt her mind to perceive. In her dream, Lillian steps out of the portrait entirely, now a young woman with knowing eyes and a cruel smile. She approaches the sleeping Eleanor, the locket floating before her like a grotesque third eye. "Great aunt," she whispers, her voice a blend of childish sweetness and ancient malice. "We've waited so long for you to find us. The cycle completes with you." Eleanor jerks awake, heart pounding. The bathroom is darker than it should be. The light bulb has burnt out, leaving only the dim illumination from the hallway to penetrate the gloom. The water still runs over the containment box, but something has changed. The box vibrates again, more violently now, creating ripples in the water that splash over the sides of the tub. And there's a smell, sickly sweet, yet putrid, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. Eleanor remembers James's warning about the smell of rotting flowers and scrambles to her feet, reaching for the container of salt she had left on the sink. As she moves to reinforce the barrier around the tub, a voice speaks from the darkness of the hallway, a child's voice, but with tones and inflections no child should possess. "Eleanor," it calls softly, "we remember you from before you were born. Your blood is our key, your flesh, our door." Eleanor freezes, the container of salt clutched to her chest. There can't be anyone in the hallway. The house is locked, secured. She's alone, isn't she? "Who's there?" she calls, her voice barely above a whisper. Laughter answers her, high and tinkling like glass wind chimes in a storm. "You know who we are, Eleanor. You've always known. Why else would you return to this house? Why else would you open the chest? You've been dreaming of us your whole life, calling to us in your sleep." Eleanor's mind races. Is this a hallucination born of fear and exhaustion? Or has the entity somehow manifested despite the containment? She needs to reinforce the salt barrier, regardless. Forcing herself to move, she steps toward the tub, only to find her path blocked by a small figure standing in the doorway. It appears to be a child of about 8, wearing what was once a christening gown, but has stretched and morphed to accommodate a larger body. The face is beautiful yet wrong somehow, the proportions slightly off, the eyes too knowing, the smile too wide. Around the child's neck hovers the locket, no longer touching the skin, but floating an inch away, spinning slowly, the forbidden symbol glowing with an inner light that illuminates the child's face from below, casting unnatural shadows. "Lillian," Eleanor whispers. The child's smile widens impossibly. "Part of me is Lillian," it agrees. "Part of me is much older. We've been waiting, Eleanor. 90 years in darkness, dreaming of freedom. You're the one we've been waiting for. Blood of the blood that bound us." "Stay back," Eleanor says, her voice stronger now as survival instinct overrides fear. She clutches the salt container like a weapon. "The binding will be renewed. You'll go back to sleep." The child, Lillian, the entity, whatever blend of both stands before her, laughs again. "The old binding is broken. The new one cannot hold what has already escaped. Look," she gestures toward the tub. Eleanor glances quickly at the containment box, maintaining her awareness of the figure in the doorway. The box has split open despite the wax seal, water pouring into it rather than flowing over it. The portrait is visible inside, but it's changing, the image fading, colors running like watercolors in rain, the paper disintegrating not from water damage, but as if the very substance of the image is being drawn out of it. "You're too late," Lillian says, her voice deepening, resonating with multiple tones speaking in unison. "The conduit has served its purpose. We are manifest now." As she speaks, her form seems to shimmer, becoming less solid, more a suggestion of a child than a physical presence. The locket, however, grows more distinct, the golden metal gleaming, the forbidden symbol burning bright enough to cast shadows on the walls. Eleanor's phone pings with a message. Without taking her eyes off the apparition, she glances at the screen. It's from James. "Something's wrong. The containment is failing. I'm 3 hours away. You need to get out of the house now. You can't leave." Lillian says, though Eleanor hasn't moved. The doors won't open for you. The windows won't break. This house has been our prison for 90 years. Now it's yours. Unless what? Eleanor asks, playing for time, her mind racing for a solution. Unless you take up the burden, Lillian says, gesturing to the locket, as Evelyn did. Share yourself with us. Become our anchor in this world. And if I refuse? Lillian's form continues to shift and blur, sometimes appearing as a child, sometimes as something else entirely, a shape of shadow and mist, with eyes like distant stars, just as Evelyn had described in her journal. Then we take what we need, the entity says, its voice now completely inhuman, a chorus of whispers and screams. Your blood, your breath, your years of life, all forfeit to feed our manifestation. The locket floats forward, moving toward Eleanor as if drawn by an invisible thread. She backs away until she hits the wall, the salt container still clutched in her hands. In desperation, she flings a handful of salt at the approaching locket. The salt passes through the apparition of Lillian without effect, but when it contacts the locket, there's a sound like a distant scream. The locket falters in its advance, the glow of the forbidden symbol flickering momentarily. Eleanor seizes the advantage, throwing more salt directly at the locket. Each grain that contacts the metal produces a tiny flare of light and a sound like sizzling. The entity hisses in pain or rage, the apparition of Lillian contorting into increasingly inhuman shapes. You cannot stop what has already begun, the entity growls, its voice now a cacophony of discordant tones. The binding is broken. We are free. Not yet, Eleanor counters, continuing to create a barrier of salt between herself and the entity. Not completely. You still need the locket, and you still need me. Her phone pings again with another message from James. The velvet pouch. Where is it? Is it still in the chest? Understanding dawns on Eleanor. The velvet pouch she had set aside contained something important, perhaps a tool or weapon against the entity. But to reach it, she would need to get past the apparition blocking the doorway and make her way to the bedroom, where the chest remained. I know what you're thinking, the entity says, its form solidifying again into the childlike appearance of Lillian, though the eyes now glow with the same golden light as the locket. The old tools won't work anymore. We've grown stronger over the decades of dreaming. What once bound us is now fuel for our freedom. Eleanor's academic mind races, analyzing the situation with the same methodical approach she would apply to a historical puzzle. The entity is confident, arrogant even, but it hasn't simply killed her or taken what it claims to need. This suggests limitations, rules it must follow, weaknesses she might exploit. If you're so powerful, she challenges, why haven't you simply taken what you want? Why the theatrics? Why appear as Lillian at all? The entity's expression shifts, a flash of something like uncertainty crossing its features before the arrogant smile returns. We are bound by certain symmetries, it admits. What was freely given must be freely taken. What was bound by blood must be unbound by blood. The forms we take are dictated by the patterns of your perception. So you need my cooperation, Eleanor concludes. You can threaten, terrify, manipulate, but ultimately, you need me to accept you willingly. The entity's smile falters slightly. Not willingly, it corrects. Merely, knowingly, understanding what you surrender. Eleanor sees her opening, a chance to negotiate, to buy time until James arrives with proper containment tools. Then let's understand each other, she says, forcing her voice to remain steady. What exactly do you want from me? And what do I get in return for my cooperation? The entity tilts its head, studying Eleanor with those ancient eyes in a child's face. Interesting, it murmurs. Evelyn never thought to bargain. She simply fought until she could fight no more, then sacrificed herself in desperation. Perhaps you are wiser. I'm a historian, Eleanor says. I learn from the past. Now answer my question. What we want is manifestation, the entity explains, its voice modulating between childish tones and something far older. To exist in your world without the constraints of the binding. To grow, experience, feed. What you get is life, not the decades Evelyn sacrificed, but years enough to satisfy most human ambitions. And knowledge, secrets of reality your kind has sought for millennia. At what cost to others? Eleanor presses. If you manifest fully, what happens to the world around you? The entity's laughter is cold and ancient. Change, it says simply. Evolution. Some will thrive in our new reality, others will not. The strong adapt, the weak provide sustenance. It has always been so, even in your human kingdoms. Eleanor shivers at the casual cruelty in those words. Whatever this entity is, whatever it promises, allowing it free rein would be catastrophic. She needs to keep it talking, keep it distracted. Show me, she demands. Show me what you truly are, not this borrowed form. If I'm to make such a choice, I deserve to see what I'm dealing with. The entity considers this request, the locket spinning faster as if reflecting internal deliberation. Very well, it says finally. Behold us as we are, but know that human minds were not built to comprehend our true nature. What you see may break you. The form of Lillian begins to change, expanding and contracting simultaneously, the proportions shifting in ways that seem to violate the basic principles of Euclidean geometry. Colors that Eleanor has no names for ripple across the surface of the being, and patterns emerge that seem to repeat infinitely inward like nested fractals. The entity grows to fill the doorway, yet somehow also becomes smaller, more concentrated, as if occupying dimensions beyond the three Eleanor can perceive. At the center of this impossible configuration floats the locket, no longer a simple piece of jewelry but a complex mechanism of light and shadow, the forbidden symbol at its heart pulsating like a living thing. The entire manifestation emanates a sound that is not quite music, not quite language, but something between that resonates in Eleanor's bones rather than her ears. The sight should drive her mad, her human brain struggling to process sensory input it was never designed to handle. But something unexpected happens instead. As she gazes at the entity's true form, Eleanor experiences a moment of profound clarity. This being, for all its power and alienness, is not omnipotent. It is bound by rules, by symmetries as it called them. It needs the locket as a focal point, an anchor, and it needs Eleanor, specifically her blood connection to Evelyn, who performed the original binding. In that moment of insight, Eleanor formulates a plan, not to destroy the entity, that may be impossible, but to bind it again, perhaps more securely than before. To do so, she needs to reach the velvet pouch in the chest, and more importantly, she needs to understand exactly what Evelyn did on that Halloween night in 1913. Enough, she says, her voice steady despite the strain of perceiving the entity's true form. Return to a shape I can speak with. The entity coalesces back into the form of Lillian, though aspects of its true nature remain visible as subtle distortions in the air around it, like heat waves rising from sun-baked asphalt. You withstood our true aspect, it observes, a note of something like respect in its multi-layered voice. Few humans can do so without their minds shattering. I told you, Eleanor says. I'm a historian. I've spent my life looking at patterns others miss, piecing together truths from fragments. Your nature is complex but not incomprehensible. And your decision? The entity presses. Will you surrender what we need, or must we take it by force, with all the resulting unpleasantness? Eleanor takes a deep breath. I need time to consider, she says. This isn't a small decision. Time is precisely what you lack, the entity counters. Dawn approaches. With the sun's first light, our window of opportunity closes. The old symmetries reassert themselves, and we must wait another cycle for the chance to manifest fully. Decide now, Eleanor Blackwood. Eleanor glances at her phone. 3:47 a.m. James had said he was 3 hours away. Even if he left immediately after his last message, he wouldn't arrive before dawn. She's on her own. I need to see the journal again, she says, stalling, to understand exactly what Evelyn did, what I'd be undoing. It's in the bedroom with the chest. The entity's eyes narrow suspiciously. A delaying tactic, it accuses. You hope your Blackwell ally arrives to save you. No, Eleanor counters. I'm a scholar. I need all the information before making a decision of this magnitude. If you want my cooperation, let me review Evelyn's account once more. Knowledge for knowledge. Isn't that a fair exchange? The entity considers this, the locket spinning thoughtfully. Very well, it concedes finally. But we accompany you, and know that we perceive your intentions. Any attempt to enact a binding without proper preparation would destroy you without harming us. Eleanor nods, keeping her expression neutral despite the surge of fear at how easily the entity read her half-formed plan. She steps forward and the apparition moves aside to allow her passage, following close behind as she makes her way down the darkened hallway to the bedroom. The chest sits where she left it, its lid still open. The velvet pouch rests beside it, small and innocuous looking. Eleanor reaches for the journal first, aware of the entity watching her every move, the locket hovering between them like a malevolent eye. "Read quickly," the entity urges. The night wanes. Eleanor flips through the journal, returning to the final entry from Halloween night, 1913. She reads Evelyn's desperate words again, searching for clues. "If you are reading this, know that I tried. God help us all, I tried. There must be more." Some indication of what Evelyn did after writing those words. Eleanor examines the journal carefully, running her fingers along the binding, the edges of the pages. She notices something she missed before. Several pages have been carefully cut out after the final entry. "Pages are missing," she says, looking up at the entity. "What happened to them?" The entity's form flickers slightly, its expression momentarily uncertain. "We do not know," it admits. "Our awareness was diminished after the ritual Evelyn performed. We experienced decades as if in a dream, with only occasional moments of clarity when the binding weakened temporarily." Eleanor's attention shifts to the velvet pouch. Could it contain not just the locket but the missing pages as well? She reaches for it, only to have the entity move swiftly between her and the pouch. "Not yet," it says. "First, your decision." "How can I decide without all the information?" Eleanor argues. "If the missing pages detail what Evelyn did, I need to know before I can agree to undo it." The entity wavers, clearly torn between suspicion and the desire to secure Eleanor's cooperation. Finally, it floats aside. "Open it," it commands, "but do not touch what lies within with your bare flesh. The symmetries require proper sequence." Eleanor carefully unties the drawstring of the velvet pouch, then upends it over the open chest. 3 objects fall out. A small golden locket identical to the one in the portrait, several folded pages that appear to have been torn from the journal, and a faded photograph she hasn't seen before. The entity hisses at the sight of the physical locket, its form becoming less distinct, more a suggestion of presence than a solid manifestation. The locket that had been hovering between them, the manifestation rather than the physical object, flares brightly, then dims, as if responding to the proximity of its material counterpart. "Read," the entity urges, its voice now strained, distant. "Quickly." Eleanor unfolds the pages with trembling hands. They contain Evelyn's handwriting, but shakier, more desperate than the earlier entries. "All Hallows Night, 1913. Midnight has come and gone. The entity manifested fully despite my efforts to prevent it. It emerged from Lillian like a butterfly from a chrysalis, leaving the child's body empty, a husk. I thought all was lost, that the horror Margaret had warned of was upon us. But in my desperation, I discovered what the Order of the Eternal Twilight had overlooked. The binding works both ways. The entity needs a human vessel, a consciousness to anchor it in our reality. The locket creates a bridge, but the bridge requires 2 endpoints. I have performed a counter-binding, linking myself to the entity just as it is linked to the locket. I have become part of the symmetry, the third point in a triangle of containment. The entity cannot manifest fully without breaking this triangle. It needs my bloodline's willing participation to complete the pattern. I write this in haste, as the binding takes hold. My strength fades with each word. I have hidden the physical locket where, God willing, it will remain undisturbed. I have removed these pages from my journal, lest they provide instructions for undoing what I have accomplished. If you are reading this, if you are of my blood, know that you carry within you the power to maintain this binding or to break it. Choose wisely, for the entity offers knowledge but brings only destruction. One final warning. The entity can create reflections of itself, projections that seem real but are merely shadows of its true power. Do not be deceived by what you see or hear. The physical locket is the key. While it remains contained, so too does the entity, regardless of what manifestations it may generate to suggest otherwise. Trust nothing but the written word and the evidence of consecrated materials. May God forgive me for my part in this tragedy. May He protect those who come after me from repeating my mistakes. Eleanor looks up from the pages to find the child form of Lillian has become even less distinct, more a suggestion of presence than a solid apparition. The locket, the manifestation, flickers like a candle in a draft. A clever deception, the entity says, its voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere, making us believe the binding was failing when in truth it merely evolved. Bringing you here, to the physical locket, was our mistake. Eleanor's gaze shifts to the physical locket lying in the chest. Unlike its manifested counterpart, It doesn't glow or move. It's simply an antique piece of jewelry with an unsettling design. Yet, according to Evelyn's hidden pages, it's the true anchor of the entity's imprisonment. The binding never failed. Eleanor realizes aloud, you could project yourself, create manifestations like the one I'm seeing now, but you couldn't truly escape while the physical locket remained contained, and no one from Evelyn's bloodline chose to release you. Yes, the entity hisses, its form becoming increasingly insubstantial. We could reach into dreams, whisper to those who slept within these walls, even manipulate the portrait to draw you to us. But true manifestation remained beyond our grasp, until now. With that, the apparition lunges forward, not toward Eleanor, but toward the physical locket in the chest. Eleanor reacts instinctively, grabbing the container of salt she had brought from the bathroom and flinging its contents in a wide arc. The salt passes through the insubstantial form of Lillian, but creates a barrier around the chest and its contents. The entity shrieks in frustration, its borrowed form dissolving further, becoming little more than a suggestion of a child's silhouette with glowing eyes. The manifested locket flares once more, then dims dramatically, the forbidden symbol now barely visible. You cannot contain us forever, the entity warns, its voice fading. Salt disperses, barriers weaken. We are patient beyond human comprehension. We will wait, perhaps, Eleanor acknowledges, but not today, and not through me. She carefully picks up the faded photograph that had fallen from the velvet pouch, examining it for the first time. It shows Evelyn as an old woman, though according to the dates, she would have been only in her 30s. Beside her stands a young boy of about 5, Eleanor's grandfather Richard. On his other side is a man Eleanor recognizes from family photographs as Dr. Samuel Blackwell. And between them, visible only as a faint outline, the suggestion of a child's form, Lillian, caught between worlds, neither fully manifest nor completely banished. The apparition fades further, the manifested locket now barely a spark of light. Your Blackwell ally approaches, the entity says, its voice now barely audible. He brings tools of containment, knowledge passed through generations. But remember this, Eleanor Blackwood, we are part of your heritage now, bound to your bloodline by Evelyn's sacrifice. What sleeps can awaken, what is bound can be freed. We will be waiting in your dreams. With those final words, the manifestation vanishes completely, leaving Eleanor alone in the bedroom with the physical locket, the journal pages, and the photograph. The house settles into silence, the oppressive atmosphere lifting like fog before morning sun. Her phone pings with a message from James. 20 minutes away. Is the containment holding? Eleanor looks at the physical locket lying in the salt-ringed chest. According to Evelyn's hidden account, this small object contains an entity of immense power, bound through a complex symmetry that includes Eleanor's own bloodline. The danger hasn't passed, merely subsided. Yes, she types back. I found Evelyn's missing journal pages. The binding never failed. The entity can project itself, but can't fully manifest without the willing participation of Evelyn's bloodline. I have the physical locket contained in salt, but there's much more to this story than either of us knew. She sets the phone down and carefully folds the journal pages, returning them to the velvet pouch along with the photograph. The physical locket she leaves where it is, surrounded by protective salt. Dawn is approaching. She can see the faint lightening of the sky through the bedroom window. Eleanor sits beside the chest, watching the locket, thinking about bloodlines and bindings, about choices made in desperate moments that echo through generations. When James arrives, they will discuss more permanent containment options, perhaps improve upon Evelyn's improvised binding. But for now, in this moment of temporary peace, Eleanor feels a connection to her great-grandmother, a woman who faced the unimaginable and found the courage to bind herself to darkness so that others might live in light. Outside, the first ray of sunrise breaks over the horizon, sending a shaft of golden illumination through the window. It falls across the chest, across the locket with its forbidden symbol. For a moment, perhaps a trick of the light, perhaps something more, Eleanor thinks she sees the locket pulse once, like a slumbering heart. Then stillness returns, and with it, silence. The portrait of the nursery that started this journey lies forgotten in the bathroom, its image faded, its power spent. But the story it revealed, of family secrets, forbidden knowledge, and sacrifices made in the space between one breath and the next, will remain with Eleanor forever. As will the entity's final warning, what sleeps can awaken, What is bound can be freed. Eleanor touches the velvet pouch containing Evelyn's hidden pages and the photograph, feeling the weight of inheritance, not just of property or possessions, but of obligation, of vigilance. "I understand now, great-grandmother," she whispers to the empty room, "and I will keep watch, as you did. I promise." In the distance, she hears a car approaching, James Blackwell arriving with his knowledge and tools. Together, they will reinforce the binding, secure the locket, ensure the entity remains contained. But a part of Eleanor knows the truth that Evelyn discovered on that Halloween night in 1913. Some bindings are never truly permanent. Some stories never truly end. They merely wait, patient beyond human comprehension, for the next chapter to begin.